Namaskar, a warm welcome to World News, and Indian perspective on All India Radio. This is Navneet Singh and with me is R.S. Raghu, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. India's Prime Minister Modi to address 90th Interpol General Assembly in New Delhi on Tuesday. Interpol Chief Jürgen Stock underlines increase in violence causing social and economic impact on governments and businesses. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to arrive in India on a 3-day visit. Also to hold discussion with External Affairs Minister Jaishankar on host of issues. Fifth Assembly of International Solar Alliance begins in New Delhi under India's presidency. NATO begins annual nuclear exercises in northwestern Europe as tensions simmer over military action in Ukraine. UK's Treasury Chief Jeremy Hunt reverse economic package announced by the government. Death toll in Iran's Evin prison risen to 8. And in football, final group stage match, Brazil beat India 5-0 in FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup in Bhubaneswar. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will address the 90th Interpol General Assembly at Pragati Maidan in New Delhi on Tuesday. The General Assembly of Interpol will be held from 18th to 21st of this month. The meeting will be attended by delegations from 195 Interpol member countries comprising of ministers, police chiefs of countries, heads of national central bureaus and senior police officers. Interacting with media in New Delhi on the eve of General Assembly meeting, Interpol Chief Jürgen Stock underlined increase in violence in real and virtual world causing social and economic impact on governments and businesses. He said organized crime networks are making billions of dollars. Mr. Stock said 99% of stolen assets remain in criminal hands is of great concern. Mr. Stock said Interpol's International Child Sexual Exploitation Database has identified an average of 7 child abuse victims every day. He said so far 30,000 victims have been identified. Mr. Stock called for increasing fight in protecting the most vulnerable in the world. CBI Special Director Praveen Sinha informed that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate the 4 days General Assembly. Mr. Sinha said Home Minister Amit Shah will be the chief guest in the concluding session. The General Assembly is the International Policing Organization's top governing body and meets once a year to take key decisions. The meet is taking place in India after 25 years. It was last held in 1997. It is now being held as part of country's 75th Independence Day celebrations. Our correspondent reports the event provides an opportunity to showcase best practices in India's law and order system to the entire world. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres will arrive in India on a 3-day official visit on Tuesday. This will be his first visit to India since he assumed his second term in office in January this year. Mr. Guterres will commence his visit by paying tributes to the victims of the 26/11 terror attacks at the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel in Mumbai. He will also address at IIT Mumbai on India at 75, UN-India Partnership, Strengthening South-South Cooperation. Mr. Guterres will join Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the launch of the Mission Lifestyle for Environment booklet, logo and tagline on 20th of this month at Kevadia in Gujarat. The Ministry of External Affairs said External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar will hold bilateral discussions with UN Secretary General on host of issues including India's upcoming presidency of the G20 and reformed multilateralism.
India's Power and New and Renewable Energy Minister R.K. Singh will inaugurate the 5th Assembly of the International Solar Alliance in New Delhi on Tuesday. Co-President of International Solar Alliance and Minister of Energy Transition of France, Ms. Anye Pannier-Runacher, and Director General of International Solar Alliance, Dr. Ajay Mathur, will be present on this occasion. The fifth assembly of the International Solar Alliance started on Monday, which will culminate on the 20th of this month. Ministers and delegates from 110 member and signatory countries are attending the assembly. 3 global solar reports, World Solar Technology Report, World Solar Market Report and World Solar Investment Report to be launched on 19th of this month during the technical sessions of the assembly. Presently, India holds the office of the President of the ISA Assembly. The International Solar Alliance is an international organization. It works with governments to improve energy access and promote solar power as a sustainable way to transition to a carbon-neutral future. The mission of the Solar Alliance is to unlock $1 trillion worth of investments in solar sector by 2030. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh said that the government has adopted a holistic approach to strengthen all aspects of national security. Addressing the convocation ceremony of the Rashtriya Raksha University in Gandhinagar in Gujarat on Monday, Mr. Singh emphasized that national security encompasses security of land and sea borders, airspace, cyber data, space, information, energy, economy and environment, and it is essential for a sovereign nation to safeguard these elements. The Defence Minister said it is high time to establish India as a developed nation during the Amrit Kaal. The Minister said peaceful coexistence is in India's culture. India has never annexed or subjugated any territory. Later, Mr. Singh launched the Gujarati edition of Modi at 20 book in Gandhinagar. Addressing the occasion, he said Mr. Modi has worked towards strengthening the cultural heritage of the country. He said, after Narendra Modi came to power as the Prime Minister, India's image has improved at global level. Mr. Singh commended the leadership of Mr. Modi in making India the 5th largest economy of the world, asserting that India has the potential to become the largest economy by 2047. He appealed to the citizens to play their part in making India one of the most powerful nations in the times to come.
The 12th edition of Biennial Defence Expo will be held in Ahmedabad and Gandhinagar, Gujarat, during which live demonstrations showcasing the equipment and skill set of the armed forces, DPSUs and industry will be held. The event will begin on Tuesday and will be continued till 22nd October. The theme of the 12th Defence Expo is Path to Pride, which is in line with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision to transform India into a strong and self-reliant nation by supporting, showcasing and forging partnerships for the Indian airspace and defence manufacturing sectors with Indian as well as global customers, the Defence Ministry said. At Defence Expo 2022, the participants will get an opportunity to showcase their equipment and platforms and be able to explore the strengths and capabilities of the expanse of Indian defence industry for forging business partnerships. As part of the Defence Expo, live demonstration by the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard and DRDO showcasing land, naval and air procedures and systems in action will be held in the evening from 4:45 p.m. daily at Sabarmati Riverfront. The joint live demonstration will include combat freefall, Sarang helicopter aerobatics, slithering from helicopter into a boat, high-speed boat runs and neutralizing enemy post, the Defence Ministry said in a statement. Over 1,300 exhibitors, including various defence PSUs and private industries, startups and states will participate in the 5-day exhibition. Briefing the media, Defence Minister Rajnath Singh said, this would be the largest ever Defence Expo showcasing India's capabilities in the defence manufacturing sector. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a news commentary on India at the IMF World Bank annual meetings. It has been written by G. Srinivasan, Senior Economic Journalist.
Against the slowdown in major economies, cross-border effects due to the ongoing geopolitical situations and inflationary pressures led by elevated food and energy prices, the annual meetings of the IMF World Bank took place in Washington. India is projected to grow at 6.8% in the current fiscal. In its World Economic Outlook released on the eve of the event, the IMF's chief economist Pierre-Olivier Gohanchas remarked that India has been doing fairly well in 2022 and is expected to continue growing fairly robustly in 2023. Even as the fund singled out for praise India's growth story, it cautioned against limited policy space given overall grim global conditions. Attesting to this accolade, India's Finance Minister Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman maintained that despite the global maelstrom of adverse economic factors, India would stay on course. She said this is because of the benign fallout of the salubrious domestic policy milieu and the government's undivided focus on key structural reforms to boost growth. After likely losing the badge to Saudi Arabia this year, the fund is quite optimistic about India emerging as the fastest growing major economy in the world again next year. Listing out a slew of initiatives in her multiple interactions, Mrs. Sitharaman specifically pointed out that how poverty alleviation too was on track, referring to the government's efforts to ensure the availability of free food grains to more than 800 million vulnerable households during the last 25 months to keep them cushioned against the implacable impact of inflation. This was achieved, she said, through the country's massive public distribution network. She also took particular pride in India's ongoing digitization drive, as the last-mile delivery of financial services to the poor has been a key priority of the government, and this has been aided ably by India's digital public good infrastructure. She legitimately claimed that India today is leading the world in terms of digital payments innovation, with our transaction cost being the lowest in the world. India pitched for smooth conclusion of the 16th General Review of Quotas of the IMF by mid-December 2023, as this is vital for increasing the voting rights of emerging market economies in line with their relative position in the world economy. This is needed to safeguard the global financial system, besides boosting the resources available for emerging and low-income countries, India said. In her intervention of the World Bank Development Committee, the Finance Minister drove home the point to avoid a unidimensional view of the subsidies by the Indian governments. She candidly told the multilateral lending bodies to differentiate between distortive subsidies and targeted support to the vulnerable households. Even as the quest for energy and food security warranted non-exclusion of fossil fuels from India's energy mix, Mrs. Sitharaman highlighted how India has set up its first pure hydrogen producing plant as well as its first 2G bioethanol refinery this year. The Washington visit enabled the Indian Finance Minister to wrap up a large number of bilateral and multilateral meetings on the sidelines of the annual parleys with key financial functionaries and central bankers from across the world, as India is all set to take the presidency of G20 from December this year. Mrs. Sitharaman held bilateral talks with U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and also addressed the closing session of the G20 Finance Ministers meeting, where she called for recognition of the collective responsibility of all countries to avert the risks faced by the global economy from aggravating. An effective tax reporting regime and information exchange on crypto assets to combat and curb offshore tax evasion was also forcibly argued by India. Rightly, she asserted that India views its rotational presidency of G20 as an opportunity as well as a responsibility. Rebuilding trust in multilateralism is at the core of India's thinking, was the call made by India as the world is driven by fragmentation, insular thinking and protectionism at this juncture. In a notable address to the students of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, Mrs. Sitharaman said, India has set a global benchmark in digitization, with India's public goods being available for countries that need them, citing how India became the world's pharma hub during the pandemic by supplying vaccination to the needy nations. Anuja Kumar for World News.
This is All India Radio, giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on our Twitter handle at AIR News Alerts.
Welcome back to World News. NATO on Monday began its long-planned annual nuclear exercise in northwestern Europe as tensions simmer over military action in Ukraine and Russian President Vladimir Putin's threat to use any means to defend Russian territory. 14 of NATO's 30 member countries were due to take part in the exercises. The military alliance said around 60 aircraft, including fighter jets and surveillance and refueling planes, will take part in the event. The bulk of the war games will be held at least 1,000 kilometers from Russia's borders. US long-range B-52 bombers will also take part in the maneuvers dubbed Steadfast Noon, which will run until October 30th. NATO is not permitting any media access. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization said that training flights will take place over Belgium, which is hosting Steadfast Noon this year, as well as over the North Sea and the United Kingdom. The exercises involve fighter jets capable of carrying nuclear warheads but do not involve any live bombs. The exercises were planned before President Putin ordered Russian military action into Ukraine in February. In Ukraine, explosive-laden suicide drones struck Kyiv on Monday, setting buildings ablaze and tearing a hole in one while sending people scurrying for shelter. Energy facilities were struck and one drone slammed into a residential building, killing 3 people, authorities said. Previous Russian airstrikes on Kyiv were mostly with missiles. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said Monday's barrage came in successive waves of 28 drones. In the Kyiv region, at least 13 were shot down, all of them flying in from the south, said a spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force, Yuri Inhat. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a social media post, "The enemy terrorized the civilian population over whole night and the whole morning." He said, "Kamikaze drones and missiles are attacking all of Ukraine." Andriy Yermak, head of Ukrainian President Office, said in a social media post that Iran's Shahid drones were among those used in the strike. The US Embassy in Kiev also condemned the desperate and reprehensible drone attacks Russia denies targeting civilians. Iran repeated on Monday its denial that it is supplying the drones to Russia. The Kremlin has not commented. Some European Union foreign ministers gathering for talks in Luxembourg on Monday called for new sanctions against Iran if Tehran's involvement in Russia's war in Ukraine is proven. The strike on Kyiv comes as fighting has intensified in the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk in recent days, as well as the continued Ukrainian counteroffensive in the south near Kherson and Zaporizhia.
UK Treasury Chief Jeremy Hunt on Monday reversed most of the economic package announced by the government just weeks ago, including a planned cut to income tax. In a bid to soothe turbulent financial markets, Hunt said he was scrapping almost all the tax cuts announced last month and signaled public spending cuts are on the way. A 2-year energy support scheme for households and businesses expected to cost more than £100 billion will now end in April and be replaced by a more targeted scheme that will cost the taxpayer significantly less than planned. Hunt was appointed on Friday after Prime Minister Liz Truss sacked Kwasi Kwarteng, who spent less than 6 weeks in the Treasury job. Truss and Kwarteng jointly came up with a September 23rd announcement of £45 billion in unfunded tax cuts that spooked financial markets. It also sent the pound to record lows and forced the Bank of England to take emergency action. Hunt spent the weekend in crisis talks with Truss and also met with Bank of England Governor Andre Bailey and the head of the government's debt management office. Hunt's moves are aimed at restoring the government's credibility for sound fiscal policy after Truss and Kwarteng rushed out a plan for tax cuts without detailing how they would pay for them. Later, Treasury Secretary addressed the House of Commons and took questions from MPs on economic issues. In Iran, the death toll from a fire at Evin prison has risen from 4 to 8. Iran's judiciary has said in a statement. Officials said dozens more were injured in the blaze at the jail in Tehran on Saturday night. Hundreds of those taking part in anti-government protests, which have swept the country for the past month, have been sent to Evin prison. It is not clear whether the incident at the jail was connected to the unrest. The judiciary said the fire began in a prison workshop after a gunfight among inmates. State TV said it was a premeditated escape plan, which the head of prisons in Tehran said was foiled by the security forces. Evin, which in 2018 was blacklisted by the US government for serious human rights abuses, Iran's top judge Gholam Hossein Mohseni blamed the fire on agents of Iran's enemy on Monday, while Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Nasser Kanani said such an event could have happened in any country. On Monday, the EU said it was imposing sanctions on 11 people and 4 organizations in Iran, including its morality police, in response to Iran's crackdown on the protests.
The United Nations will push for a nationwide ceasefire in Syria even after bursts of fighting in the last rebel-held region have punctured a 2-year truce there, killing hundreds, the UN envoy said on Monday. Geir Pedersen, the UN Special Envoy for Syria, spoke to reporters after meeting the foreign ministers in Damascus. He said Syria's economic situation is extremely difficult as close to 15 million people are in need for humanitarian assistance. Syrian government forces have over the past years captured much of the country with the help of President Bashar Assad's allies, Russia and Iran. A ceasefire brokered by Turkey and Russia in March 2020 stopped the Russian-backed government offensive on the last rebel stronghold in northwestern Syria. More than 80% of Syrians now live in poverty, leaving much of the population dependent on humanitarian assistance. The conflict that started in 2011 has killed hundreds of thousands and displaced half the country's pre-war population of 23 million. More than 7 million Venezuelans have left their homeland since 2015 amid an ongoing economic and political crisis. According to new UN data, more than half of them face challenges accessing food, housing and stable employment, the UN says. But despite the difficulties facing them abroad, the flow of Venezuelans escaping turmoil in their homeland has not let up. Aid agencies warn that these migrants risk being forgotten amid other crises.
Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio has instructed the Culture Minister to launch a probe into the religious corporation previously known as the Unification Church. The group is under close scrutiny for alleged shady marketing practices and its solicitation of large donations from followers. An investigation into the group will be conducted under a provision of the Religious Corporations Act. The Act grants authorities the right to collect reports and ask questions of groups suspected of violating the law. The provision was added to the Act in 1996 following a series of incidents perpetrated by the Aum Shinrikyo cult, including the deadly 1995 sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway system. Meanwhile, authorities have to observe rules to protect freedom of worship.
In Nigeria, more than 600 people have died so far in the worst flooding that the country has seen in a decade. The Nigerian Humanitarian Affairs Minister Sadia Umar Farooq said that around 82,000 houses and over 100,000 hectares of farmland have been submerged and destroyed due to the worst flooding. Nigeria's Ministry for Humanitarian Affairs last week reported that around 1.4 million people had been displaced from their homes. Dr. Dilip Mahalanobis, the epoch-making doctor who pioneered the use of oral rehydration theory for treatment of diarrheal diseases and development of oral rehydration solution ORS, passed away in Kolkata yesterday. He proved that the effectiveness of ORS in cholera patients at a refugee camp in Bonga, West Bengal during the 1971 war. Dr. Mahalanobis was made a member of the WHO Diarrheal Disease Control Program in 1983 for over 5 years.
The UNICEF has said that economic crises due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict have thrown more than 4 million children into poverty across Eastern Europe and Central Asia. It said on Monday that Russian and Ukrainian children have been most affected since the conflict started in February. The UNICEF drew its conclusions from a study of data from 22 countries.
The Sensex and the Nifty today gained more than 0.5%. Both indices rose amid positive cues from majority of global share markets. The Sensex closed above 58,400 points while the Nifty settled above 17,300 level. A report from the business desk.
The Sensex climbed 491 points or 0.85% to finish at 58,411. The Nifty surged 126 points or 0.73% to end at 17,312. At global stock markets, shares in the Asia Pacific were trading mixed. Investors remained cautious amid recession fears and continued tightening of monetary policies around the world. However, value buying supported majority of the share indices. China's Shanghai Composite Index closed 0.4% up. South Korea's Kospi gained 0.3%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index added 0.2%. On the other hand, Japan's Nikkei 225 declined 1.2% and Singapore's Straits Times ended 0.8% down. European shares, bonds and currency markets moved higher in intraday trade. Oil prices fell as China's continuation of loose monetary policy was offset by fears that high inflation and energy costs could drag the global economy into recession. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading at $91 per barrel. And in the forex market, the rupee appreciated marginally by 1 paisa against the US dollar. The domestic currency closed at 82 rupees and 36 paisa against the American unit. Anubha Rohatgi for World News, All India Radio.
The International Day for the Eradication of Poverty is observed on 17th of October every year. The theme for this year is The Dignity for All in Practice. The history of observation of this day can be traced back to 17th October 1987. On that day, over 100,000 people gathered at the Trocadero in Paris and proclaimed that poverty is a violation of human rights, and to ensure that these rights are respected. Since then, every year people gather on this day to renew their commitment and show their solidarity with the poor. It was recognized by the UN General Assembly on 22nd December 1992. To alleviate poverty as part of Sustainable Development Goals, the Government of India has introduced many schemes in the last few years.
In football, host Indian women's team suffered a 5-0 defeat against Brazil in their final Group A fixture of the FIFA Under-17 World Cup at the Kalinga Stadium in Bhubaneswar tonight. Hosts India are already out of the World Cup, having lost their first two Group League encounters against the United States and Morocco. Gabriel Barcon opened the scoring for Brazil in the 11th minute, followed by Aline Gomes adding another in the 40th minute. In the second half, Aline further increased her side's lead in the 51st minute. Lara ended the match with 2 goals in the 86th minute and the stoppage time. Brazil have also qualified for the knockouts and will face Germany in the quarter-final.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world, as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post observes that with Liz Truss agendas gutted, Brits wonder who is in charge. The Financial Times in a lead item says Jeremy Hunt scraps tax cuts and slashes energy package in bid to claim markets. The Guardian publishes interview with Dr. Fauci urging US to resume long COVID research funding efforts. The Wall Street Journal reports that Xi Jinping's ideological ambition darkens China's economic prospects. Asahi Shimbun says that overarching theme emerging from China's ongoing Communist Party Congress is one of continuity, not change. A quick look at the headlines once again. India's Prime Minister Modi to address 90th Interpol General Assembly in New Delhi on Tuesday. Interpol Chief Jürgen Stock underlines increase in violence causing social and economic impact on governments and businesses. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to arrive in India on a 3-day visit. Also to hold discussion with External Affairs Minister Jaishankar on host of issues. Fifth Assembly of International Solar Alliance begins in New Delhi under India's presidency. NATO begins annual nuclear exercises in northwestern Europe as tensions simmer over military action in Ukraine. UK Treasury Chief Jeremy Hunt reverse economic package announced by the government. Death toll in Iran's Evin prison risen to 8. And in football, final group stage match, Brazil beat India 5-0 in FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup in Bhubaneswar. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan by artist from Zambia.
जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने
And with that, we end this bulletin. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.